The cold, dark void of space was all Marcus had known for the past few weeks. His mission had started like any other. A routine patrol, a simple assignment. But nothing about this mission had been simple. He had been captured by the Zarkan Dominion, a powerful empire of alien warriors who controlled much of the galaxy. The Zarkans were ruthless, and their reputation for destroying weaker species was legendary. Marcus was a soldier, and soldiers had a job to do. He had tried to fight back when they attacked, but it had been futile. They were too strong, too fast, too advanced. The last thing Marcus remembered was the flash of blue energy as their ship disabled his own. He had no idea how long he'd been unconscious or where he was now. When he woke, he found himself in a dark cell, shackled and surrounded by the scent of metal and cold stone. His head throbbed and his mind raced. He tried to push himself up but quickly realized that his body was sore and stiff from the rough treatment he had received. He was alone, but he could hear faint voices echoing from outside the cell. It was a strange language, one that was harsh, full of sounds he couldn't quite comprehend. The door to his cell slid open with a hiss and a figure stepped inside. The person was tall, easily 7 feet, with muscular arms and a stance that screamed authority. The figure was an alien, a Zarkan, Marcus realized. The creature's skin was a deep shade of purple, with veins visible underneath. It wore a dark, intricate armor that looked both practical and ceremonial. Marcus tensed, preparing for whatever came next. But the Zarkan didn't move immediately. Instead, they stared at him with an unsettling intensity, as though studying him. "Human," the Zarkan said, its voice deep and steady. "You are a gift." A gift? Marcus thought, confused. What could a species like the Zarkans possibly want with a human? The Zarkan reached for his chains and Marcus flinched, but the alien's grip was gentle as it unlocked them. He was free to move, but something told him he wasn't free to leave. There was no way out of this situation, not without a fight. "You will meet the war chief," the Zarkan said as it led Marcus out of the cell. It motioned for him to follow, and Marcus had no choice but to obey. He could feel the weight of its eyes on him, and for the first time in his life he truly understood the meaning of the word pray. The corridor they walked through was cold and silent. The walls were smooth, the kind of polished stone that suggested an ancient, long-established civilization. They passed by several more Zarkan warriors, each one as imposing as the last. None of them spoke to Marcus or even looked at him directly. It was as though he was invisible to them, a mere thing to be dealt with, nothing more. They reached a large set of doors at the end of the corridor, and the Zarkan warrior motioned for Marcus to stop. The doors opened with a low rumbling sound revealing a grand hall. At the far end of the hall stood a figure that made Marcus's heart skip a beat. She was tall, much taller than any human he had ever seen, and her armor gleamed in the dim light of the hall. The war chief. Marcus had heard of the Zarkan war chief, General Zevra, though he had never expected to see her in person. She was known throughout the galaxy for her ruthlessness and strength, a being who had single-handedly led the Zarkan Dominion to victory over countless civilizations. It was said that she had destroyed the last of humanity 200 years ago, wiping out every human colony with relentless precision. Her eyes were cold and sharp, like two black stones. But when they landed on Marcus, they widened in what seemed to be disbelief. Impossible, she thought. The last human had been destroyed long ago. She took a step forward, her boots echoing through the hall with a heavy thud. Her gaze never left Marcus, and for a moment, it seemed as though time itself had stopped. The air between them felt charged, thick with tension. "You are human?" Zevra's voice was a low growl, laced with incredulity. Marcus nodded, unsure of how to respond. "Yes, ma'am. I'm a human soldier. My name is Marcus." Zevra's eyes narrowed, and she took another step toward him. The air seemed to grow colder as she examined him. She couldn't understand how this could be possible. Humanity had been eradicated. She had seen to it herself, making sure there were no survivors. So how was this human standing before her, alive and well? "You were supposed to be gone," she murmured, her voice tinged with disbelief. I destroyed the last of your kind. I saw it with my own eyes. Marcus could feel the weight of her words, but he didn't know how to respond. He had read about the history of the Zarkan Dominion, how they had wiped out humanity in a bloody war 2 centuries ago. But now, here he was, a living human in the presence of the woman who had been responsible for that destruction. I don't understand, Zevra said, her voice rising slightly. How are you alive? How did you survive? Marcus didn't have the answers. All he knew was that something had gone wrong, something he couldn't explain. He had no idea how he had ended up here, in the heart of the Zarkan Dominion, facing the woman who had erased his people from existence. I don't know, General, he said quietly, his voice steady despite the overwhelming fear he felt. I was sent on a mission and I ended up here. Zevra's expression darkened, and for a moment Marcus feared that she would order his execution right then and there. But instead, she stared at him with something akin to curiosity, something that almost felt like pity. Impossible, she muttered again, more to herself than to him. I will get to the bottom of this. You will stay with me until I do. She turned away from Marcus and walked back to her throne at the far end of the hall, her boots clicking on the stone floor with every step. The room seemed to grow colder with each passing moment. Marcus was left standing in the middle of the grand hall, his heart pounding in his chest as he realized the gravity of his situation. He was alone in the heart of an alien empire, facing the one person who had caused the extinction of his species, and somehow against all odds he had been chosen as a gift. Days passed in the heart of the Zarkan Dominion, and Marcus had little time to reflect on his fate. His life had become a whirlwind of strange events, all leading him to one unshakable truth. He was not just a captive. Somehow he had become part of something far bigger than himself. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play here. Why had he been chosen as a gift to General Zevra? Why, after all these years, was a human still alive? Each day, Zevra watched Marcus closely, observing him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. She had been told that the last human had been destroyed, completely eradicated 200 years ago. She was sure of it. But standing before her now was living proof that somehow humanity had survived. The questions burned in her mind, each more confusing than the last. How could this be possible? What had happened in the past 2 centuries? She couldn't get rid of the nagging thought that there was more to this than Marcus's arrival. Despite the growing tension between them, Zevra ordered Marcus to train with her warriors. She told herself it was because she needed to know if this human was truly as weak as her kind had believed. But deep down, she also wanted to understand how he was alive, and if he posed any real threat to the Zarkan Dominion. Marcus, on the other hand, was trying his best to stay alive. He had little choice in the matter, and he knew that survival meant gaining Zevra's respect. But the more he trained and observed her, the more he began to understand the complexities of the woman before him. She was not just a war chief. Zevra was something more, someone who had carried the burden of an entire galaxy's conquest on her shoulders for hundreds of years. The training was grueling. The Zarkan warriors were strong, faster than Marcus could ever imagine, and relentless in their discipline. But Marcus wasn't a novice. He had been trained for combat, even though human soldiers were never meant to go up against such advanced beings. Still, every time he faced one of Zevra's warriors, he held his ground. He used his agility and sharp mind to outmaneuver them in ways that even they weren't prepared for. Day by day, Zevra watched as Marcus slowly earned the respect of her warriors. She noticed that, while he was clearly not as strong as they were, he made up for it with intelligence and strategy. His adaptability amazed her. How could a species so weak be capable of such tactics? This human, despite his appearance, was proving to be more than a simple prisoner. One evening, after a particularly difficult training session, Zevra called Marcus to her chambers. She had something important to discuss with him, something that had been weighing on her mind for days. As Marcus entered the chamber, he could feel the tension in the air. Zevra stood by the large window, her back to him. The room was dimly lit with only the faint glow of stars outside illuminating her figure. She was silent for a moment, as if contemplating something deeply important. "I need answers, human," she said, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was low but firm. "You are a mystery. I've seen the last of your kind fall, yet here you stand, alive and well. How is this possible?" Marcus felt the weight of her words. He had known this moment would come. There was no escaping the truth now. He walked closer to Zevra, though he kept a respectful distance. "I don't know how I'm here, General, but I can tell you what happened. There's a colony, a human colony. It was lost to time, hidden far from where your people reached." Zevra's eyes narrowed, but she didn't interrupt. "I was born there," Marcus continued. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus continued to live within the heart of the Zarkan dominion. Each day was a challenge to survive, a challenge to prove his worth, and a challenge to understand the strange new world he had found himself in. As much as he had hoped to find answers, the questions continued to grow. What did his survival mean for the future of humanity? What role did General Zevra play in all of this? Zevra herself was a mystery to him. She had been the one to lead the destruction of his species, but now every time they spoke he saw something in her that made him wonder if she had begun to question the very empire she had helped build. She had never spoken openly of the past, of the war, of the devastation, but Marcus could feel that something had changed within her, even if she didn't admit it. Their relationship had changed too. No longer was he just a prisoner, brought to her as a gift. He had proven himself in small ways. He had earned her respect, but it was a fragile thing. There were still moments where Zevra would look at him with cold, calculating eyes, and Marcus would remember that his life could end with the flick of her wrist. But there were other times, rare moments, where he saw something different in her gaze, something that almost resembled curiosity, something that made him think she might be starting to see him as more than just a human. The Zarkan warriors around them were beginning to notice the change too. They had expected Marcus to be a mere curiosity, something to be dealt with quickly and without care. But now, after weeks of watching him train and learn, they were starting to question their own beliefs. Was he really weak, as they had always thought humans to be? Or was he something more? Zevra's warriors had seen how Marcus had outsmarted their best fighters in hand-to-hand combat. He wasn't the strongest, but his mind was sharp. He learned quickly. His instincts were honed and his courage was undeniable. It was clear that Marcus had much more to offer than they had ever given him credit for. Yet still, many of them viewed him with disdain, seeing him as an inferior species that had no place among the Zarkan elite. As Marcus trained, he found that his skills were improving. He had been taught in the ways of warfare, but never had he imagined facing an enemy like the Zarkans. Their strength was unmatched, but Marcus had learned to use his intelligence and agility to outthink them. During his daily training sessions, he focused on strategy, movement, and adaptability. Each lesson made him stronger, more capable. And Zevra watched it all, silently approving as he grew. But in the back of her mind, she wondered, was he becoming too strong? Was this human becoming too valuable to simply be discarded? The tension between them grew thicker with each passing day. Zevra would often invite Marcus to her private chambers, where they would engage in conversations that went beyond training. She asked him about his people, about his history, and about his dreams for the future. In return, Marcus would ask about her past, about the war she had waged, about her victories and losses. It was in these moments that they began to understand each other, though the understanding was still distant, like two people who spoke the same language but couldn't quite grasp the meaning of each other's words. One evening, after a particularly intense training session, Zevra approached Marcus. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes gleamed with a certain determination. "Marcus," she began, her voice steady, "I have been thinking. You are different from the others. You are not like the humans I destroyed. You have a strength I did not expect." Marcus raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "You said there are others like you. Survivors," Zevra continued. Where are they? Why have they not made contact with my dominion? Why hide in the shadows as you do? The question took Marcus by surprise. He had never thought about the reasons behind the humans' decision to remain hidden for so long. There were many reasons. Fear of the Zarkan Empire, fear of being discovered, fear of the unknown. But he had never considered how to explain all of that to someone who had been their enemy for so long. The survivors, Marcus said slowly. They fear you. They fear your empire. For generations, the Zarkan Dominion has been a name whispered in fear among my people. We thought we were alone and we stayed hidden trying to rebuild what we lost. We didn't want to draw attention, not until we were strong enough to fight back. Zevra's eyes narrowed as she listened. So you hide, like rats in the shadows, too weak to face us? You think you can rebuild an entire species while hiding from the very ones who destroyed you? Marcus's jaw tightened. We didn't choose to hide. We were forced into it. There's more to humanity than just fear. We are survivors. And if we are going to rebuild, we need to stand together, to stop running. Zevra remained silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on him. She was used to ruling through fear, through strength, and through the iron fist of her warriors. She had never seen humans as anything more than prey. But now she found herself questioning her entire belief system. She had assumed that humanity was weak, that they had nothing left to fight for. Yet here stood Marcus challenging everything she had known. I cannot allow you to return to your people, Zevra said finally, her voice hard. The Zarkan Dominion cannot allow a rebellion to form. But I also cannot ignore your strength. You have proven yourself more than just a survivor. You have become a warrior. Marcus stared at her, his expression hardening. He had expected this. He knew Zevra would not simply let him go. The Dominion was too powerful, too vast, and she was too ruthless to allow any threats to her rule. But he had something to prove, not just to her, but to himself, and to the last remnants of humanity. You don't understand, Marcus replied, his voice steady. My people aren't like you. We don't fight for power or conquest. We fight for survival, for a future. We're not going to go away. And one day we'll come out of the shadows. Zevra studied him closely, weighing his words. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. A fire. A determination that reminded her of herself when she had first risen to power. It was the fire of someone who would never back down, no matter the odds. You are different, she murmured almost to herself. But the question is, Marcus, how much will you sacrifice for your people? How much are you willing to give up to see them survive? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He thought about his people, about the families that had been lost in the war, about the colony that had risked everything to stay hidden. They had survived for so long, but Marcus knew that their survival could not last forever. Eventually, they would have to make a stand. I'll sacrifice whatever it takes, he said, his voice filled with resolve. I'll give everything for the future of humanity. Zevra looked at him for a long time, her mind racing. She had always believed in strength, in power, in the might of the Zarkan Dominion. But now, she was faced with something she didn't understand. Could humanity truly be capable of such strength? Could they rise from the ashes of their destruction to challenge the Dominion? Her gaze softened for just a moment, before her mask of coldness returned. We will see, Marcus. We will see what your kind is truly capable of. The days that followed Marcus's conversation with Zevra were filled with tension. The general's words echoed in his mind. We will see what your kind is truly capable of. She had been a fierce leader for so long, guiding her people with an iron fist. But now Marcus could sense that she was beginning to see humanity in a different light. Not as weak prey, but as something more. What that meant for him and his people, however, remained uncertain. The Zarkan warriors continued to observe him. Marcus knew that he was constantly being watched. But as each day passed, something strange began to happen. The warriors started to treat him differently, not with the same contempt as before, but with a grudging respect. It was a small change, but Marcus noticed it. He had proven himself to them. He was no longer just the last human. He was a worthy opponent, a force to be reckoned with. One day, while training in the sparring arena, Marcus felt a shift in the air. It wasn't the usual heavy silence that accompanied the Zarkan warriors watching him. Instead, there was a quiet murmur among them, a whisper of something important. He didn't know what it was, but he could sense that something was about to change. After the training session, Zevra approached him. There was something different in her demeanor today, an urgency he hadn't noticed before. She stood before him, her arms crossed over her chest and her piercing eyes locked onto his. "Marcus," she said, her voice low. "There are factions within my empire that do not share my views. They do not believe humanity should be allowed to live. You are a threat to them, and if I do not act soon, they will take matters into their own hands." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. The words he had feared were finally coming to light. There were enemies within Zevra's own ranks, warriors who still believed that humanity was nothing more than a pest to be eradicated. He had thought that, once he gained Zevra's respect, he would be safe. But now he realized that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed in this brutal empire. "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked, his voice steady, though inside he was tense. Zevra's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something close to worry. "I want you to help me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I cannot defeat them." The atmosphere in the Zarkan dominion had shifted. Marcus could feel it in the air, thick with uncertainty. Factions within Zevra's ranks were stirring, and their rebellion was no longer a secret. The tension between the war chief and her enemies was building, and soon, a battle would erupt that could change the future of both humanity and the Zarkan Empire. Marcus had spent the past weeks working closely with Zevra, planning, training, and preparing for the inevitable conflict. He had met with the rebels, formed an alliance with Kale and his followers, and helped craft a strategy that would strike at the heart of the rebellion within Zevra's empire. But the plan had one crucial flaw. Marcus wasn't the one who needed to fight. Zevra needed to take control. She needed to prove to her warriors, to her people, that she could lead not only with strength but with wisdom, that she could be more than just the ruthless conqueror they had followed for centuries. And Marcus was the one who had to help her see that. The plan was simple. Marcus and Kale would lead a small strike force against the rebel faction, but the real test would come after the battle. The rebels were determined to overthrow Zevra, to replace her with a leader who would bring back the old ways of the Dominion, a leader who would destroy humanity once and for all. If Zevra couldn't stop them, everything she had worked for would be lost, and Marcus knew that failure would mean the end of any hope for humanity's survival. The day of the battle arrived, and the tension in the air was almost suffocating. Marcus stood beside Zevra in her war room, watching as her commanders prepared their forces. He had learned so much in the past few weeks, about the Zarkans, about their culture, and about the warrior within Zevra herself. But none of that knowledge could prepare him for what was about to happen. "This is it," Marcus said quietly, his voice tense. Zevra turned to face him, her eyes hard. But there was something else in them, something he hadn't seen before. It was the look of someone who was prepared to risk everything, not just for power, but for something greater, for a chance to build something new. "I know," Zevra replied, her voice steady but with an edge of uncertainty. "But you have to understand, Marcus. This battle is not just about survival. It's about proving to my people that there is a way forward, a way to change the Dominion." Marcus nodded, though doubt still lingered in his mind. He knew Zevra was capable of incredible strength, but was she ready to lead her people in a new direction? Was she ready to put aside her empire's brutal past for a future that could include humanity? The battle began as planned, with Marcus and Kale leading their strike force against the rebel stronghold. It was fierce, and the rebels fought with everything they had, determined to hold their ground. Marcus had fought in many battles, but this was different. This time he was fighting for something more than just survival. He was fighting for a future that could unite two species, one that had been broken by war one that had been left behind. As the battle raged on, Marcus and his team pushed forward, securing key positions and cutting off the rebels' supply lines. Zevra, leading her forces with unyielding precision, was right behind them, her warriors striking with brutal force. It was a brutal, bloody fight, but it was clear that the rebels were losing ground. Their leadership was weak, and they had underestimated the resolve of Zevra's forces. In the heat of the battle, Marcus found himself face to face with the leader of the rebel faction. The rebel leader was a tall, muscular Zarkan warrior with a fierce gaze, his armor scratched and dented from the fight. His eyes burned with hatred. "You cannot win, human," the rebel leader sneered. "The Dominion will never change. Zevra will fall, and we will rise." Marcus stood his ground, his hand tightly gripping his weapon. He knew that this fight was not just about defeating the rebels. It was about sending a message. If they were going to have any chance of peace, they needed to show that the old ways were over, that the Zarkan Dominion had to change or it would fall into chaos. "Zevra is different," Marcus said, his voice steady. "She's not the leader you think she is. You'll never win if you keep fighting for the past. You're just trying to destroy what's left." The rebel leader laughed bitterly, raising his weapon to strike. "You are a fool, human. You think she'll change. She'll crush you just like the rest of your kind." Marcus didn't wait for him to attack. With a quick movement, he lunged forward, knocking the rebel leader off balance. They struggled for a moment, but Marcus had the advantage. He used his agility and training to disarm the rebel leader and bring him to the ground. In that moment, Marcus realized something. He wasn't just fighting for humanity. He was fighting for change. And that change would come not through force, but through understanding. With the rebel leader captured, Marcus signaled for the rest of his team to advance. The remaining rebels quickly surrendered, realizing they were outmatched. The battle was won, but the true test was still to come. After the dust settled and the wounded were tended to, Marcus returned to Zevra's command center. She stood at the front, surrounded by her commanders, her eyes scanning the battlefield. She had led her forces to victory, but the battle was far from over. The real challenge was what came next. Would her people accept the change she was offering, or would they reject it in favor of the old ways? As Marcus approached, Zevra turned to face him. Her expression was still hard, but there was a flicker of something else, something he hadn't seen before. A sense of relief, a sense of hope. "You did well," Zevra said quietly, her voice low but sincere. "Without you, we might not have won." Marcus nodded, though he knew the victory wasn't just his. It was theirs. Zevra's, the warriors who had followed her, and the rebels who had chosen to stand down. This was the beginning of something new. "The battle isn't over," Marcus replied, "but we've shown them that there's another way, a way that doesn't end in destruction." Zevra's gaze softened slightly. "Yes, we've proven that change is possible, but the hard part is just beginning." Marcus glanced at the warriors around them, the soldiers who had fought so fiercely. "What happens now?" he asked. "How do you convince them to follow you, to believe in what you're trying to do?" Zevra took a deep breath, her eyes thoughtful. "It won't be easy. Many of them still believe in the old ways, but we've shown them that they can trust me. They can trust the future we're trying to build." She turned back to the battlefield, her gaze focused and unwavering. "This victory is just the first step. But it is a victory, Marcus. And it means that for the first time in a long time I can lead not with fear, but with hope." Marcus felt a surge of pride. For the first time he saw the leader Zevra could truly be, not a conqueror, but a guide for her people, and for humanity. Together they could build something greater than either species could alone. As the warriors of both sides gathered, the future seemed uncertain, but it was full of possibility. The fight wasn't over, but the first light of a new era had begun. War had ended, but the true battle was just beginning. After the victory over the rebel faction, there was a shift in the air, an uneasy calm that settled over the Zarkan Dominion. The warriors who had once stood in unwavering support of their old ways were now questioning everything. And at the center of it all stood General Zevra, the once feared conqueror, now the leader of a dominion that had the potential to change. The challenge, however, was far from over. Marcus had been with Zevra throughout the battle, fighting side by side with her forces, but the real test lay in the aftermath. With the rebellion crushed, Zevra had earned her warriors' respect on the battlefield. But the true challenge was gaining their trust, convincing them to follow her vision for a future where humanity and the Zarkans could coexist. Marcus stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching as the Zarkan warriors tended to the wounded, cleaned their weapons, and prepared for what was to come. The smoke of battle still hung in the air, but the atmosphere had changed. The tension that had once defined their existence was slowly being replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Change was in the air. Zevra approached him, her steps quiet, but purposeful. She had always been the embodiment of strength, her presence commanding respect. But now there was something different about her. She no longer held herself with the unyielding posture of a conqueror. Instead, there was a vulnerability to her, a sense of purpose that wasn't driven by the need for dominance, but by the desire to create something better. "The battle is won," Zevra said softly, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. "But now we must rebuild, Marcus. The Dominion will not change overnight. There are those who will resist what I want to do. They will fight to keep things as they were." Marcus nodded. He had seen the resistance in the eyes of some of Zevra's warriors, those who still believed in the old ways. They didn't trust change. They didn't trust humanity. And they certainly didn't trust a war chief who was willing to extend her hand to the very species they had once fought to destroy. "I know," Marcus said quietly, "but you've shown them something they didn't believe was possible. You've proven that you can lead not just through strength but through something more. Something that gives them hope." Zevra looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face. "Do you think they will follow me? Do you think they will accept this new vision?" Marcus took a deep breath, thinking about everything that had led them to the